Yeah, so David is the founding partner of deep tech research and ESG venture capital fund SDGx, right? And today and in this session here, we're going to get into like the opportunities. What opportunities lie in the ESG sector now? What industries are most ripe for disruption? And what can an entrepreneur look forward to in this decade? So, David, thank you so much for being here, man.
And it's great to be here. Thanks for the invite.
Yeah. So, yeah, let's get right into it, man. So, could you give us an overview? Well, first of all, just a short introduction of yourself and what have you been working on? What are you excited about right now?
Just to give a bit of a background, I mean, I'm Canadian, but I spent most of my career in Europe, corporate finance. Spent about 20 years in Europe, and this was old Europe, so this was before the European Union, the common currency and everything else, where the trade challenges and everything were there. We had the Cold War going on with Russia, and there was a lot of American companies that were really coming into Europe and trying to figure out now how do we now get and leverage their markets as well. So there was a big fun and everything else, but I sort of got sick of the corporate politics, I think like most people do. And so I ended up going back to school on the East Coast, came back during the .com, had a couple startups. So I really got my fingers wet in doing the internet.com and really tried to understand where the internet as a technology was going and how disruptive that was going to be. And I can tell you war stories about that time. But I got lucky, had a couple exits, ended up in Switzerland because the money ended up in Switzerland. And then I was trying to figure out what to do. So I was looking around, I sort of did this startup thing. I've done the corporate thing, I've done the academic stuff. So I was looking around and I found development, this concept of development. And this becomes really interesting. So I joined the United Nations and I spent about 12 years with the United Nations, about 4 in Geneva and the rest out here in Bangkok at the regional center. Anywhere from Afghanistan to Japan all the way down to Fiji, so everything in between. And I tell you, development sector brings you a whole new perspective. Even if you have that corporate background, even if you have that entrepreneurial spirit, when you look at the development sector, you see opportunities everywhere. Emerging markets, new market creation, different consumer behavior patterns, you see it everywhere. And that really sort of brought that in. So I left the United Nations about a year ago, and we created SDGx, which is more or less an impact VC. So it is a VC model structure, but we are actually looking for impact. I mean, SDG is in our name, right? So we're actually looking for impact, but we're turning it over. So we're not really looking at finding impact and wrapping a business model around it. We're actually looking at extremely strong business models and wrapping impact around it. And we're focusing on deep tech. So a lot of the new technologies that are coming down the pipeline. And we've created the ecosystem from research to post-acceleration. We work with a lot of scale-ups. And then obviously the investment funds. And the first investment fund that we're structuring right now, we just launched our GP fund on climate technology. And we're structuring our second fund, which will probably launch around Q4 of this year, $100 million fund. And this is actually the focus area that we're looking at. And we look at climate technology. It's anywhere from AI to mobility to energy to agronomics. It is the whole spectrum, but it's really focused on decarbonization and some of the issues that are built around the climate challenge.
Yeah. David is very humble, but maybe I give background on how I met him. So first, everyone knows David out here. He's the guy who used to manage billions of dollars United Nations Development Fund in innovation, and I got the honor to meet you for a quick call of like 15 minutes, which I think I've learned more during that call about deep technology than my whole 5 years in Paris doing my master's degree. Even though I was hanging on TechCrunch. But seriously, like, you are a book, but there is no one who actually talks as much as you on deep tech and impact at the same time. So it's a very strange character that is a private equity guy with a background who worked in the United Nations, and that's why it's so exceptional to see that. And I think this is a new trend, because when I look at the massive funds in the US, when I look at founder funds, when I look at ARK Invest, when I look at a lot of these new big funds from billionaires like Jeff Bezos, Blue Planet, and all these funds, they are sustainable funds. They are mixing technology and deep tech, with sustainable approach to save the forest, to save the environment, to save the climate. And you've been the first one to tell me about this, and I think you should tell that message and story to everyone here who's watching as well.
Well, it's interesting in the sense where you do see this now, but I can call myself an accidental hybrid. So I started in one country, in one sector, went to Europe in a different sector, ended up in Asia in a different sector, worked the whole east coast of the US in a different sector, and it all sort of builds in. And I think when I was going to school, certainly my undergrad and my master's, the focus was specialization, you specialized. And this is the problem with the education system right now, because they're still looking at specialization, but what the world needs is hybrids. They need the humanities have to come back, people have to understand around the consumer mental mind, how citizen activism is starting to shape up, the pressures on investment companies to really go green, the pressures on governments, that are, and all this dysfunctionality is happening right now. I mean, the world is a mess at the moment because you have these three sectors, private sector, civic sector, and the public sector, all having identity crisis. Public sector doesn't know what to do, governments don't know what to do, they can't catch up with technology, they couldn't catch up with the internet. You can't imagine the struggle they're having with AI, genomics, biotech, material sciences. And then you've got the private sector. The VC model is broken. It was very interesting. The VC model was there to develop how do you manage risk. That's what investors do. They manage risk. And in the early internet startup, relatively an unsophisticated technology. It's not that hard. You could lose your job and within a month be a webmaster, within another month create your own company. I mean, this is simple stuff, right? They're still struggling with the internet. Now you have things like AI and all the variants of AI. How are they going to deal with that?
Yeah.
Right? So they get defensive policies like the ethics of AI.
Yeah.
But in honest reality, I mean, AI is it's a natural math. It's a comparative natural math. It doesn't need ethics. Humans need ethics.
Yeah.
And this is where the focus has to shift around. So if us as a society are going to be successful in the next 10 to 15 years, it's not the technology that has to change, it's us that has to change, right?
Yeah.
And that's where the mindset is changing. New VC models are coming up, new investment models are coming up, new government models are coming out. You've got governments now that are handing over and privatizing most everything, education, health, security. They're privatizing because they can't deal with it anymore. So they let the private sector bring in private sector innovation into public sector services and start to work that way. So we're having this blurry moment. So not only am I an accidental hybrid, but we are moving very much into a hybrid economy and a hybrid society. And that's where the education system has to really pick up the skills that are needed to be successful within a hybrid society or a hybrid economy. And regulation has to change, policy making has to change, and even some of the tax structures, the way that wealth is being created right now. I mean, Bezos, these guys are into hundreds of billions right now. And they're good. They deserve it because they're exploiting what the government couldn't do. They're exploiting what private sector could not do. So there's nothing wrong with having $100 billion. Having $100 billion and hurting people, that's wrong. But who has $100 billion and hurts people? Some governments. So this is the issue now when it comes into people doing all this finger pointing and blaming. And they've got to pull back and understand that, listen, we've got a heavy 10 years, 15 years ahead of us with 6 different clusters of advanced technologies hitting us. We've got to stop finger pointing. We've got to start moving.
That's amazing. And that gives us really material to think that in this complex society that we're living right now, it's not a simple problem. It's not a simple solution. It's not A equal, something. And it's not everything that we believe strongly, fundamentally rooted is actually being redefined. It's actually really being redefined by technology. And that starts a new movement of also morally, ethically, and organizational restructure, which even our governments are not ready to face. And this is where when I think about it, oh my God, why we don't have more tech people in the government? Why we don't have more millennials who understand a little bit more these technologies into our governments? because that would be better for the nation, right? And I think that's another topic, but that's really interesting.
But you do see movement. Singapore, for example. Singapore has been one of the really forward-looking governments to really start to look at impact investing, look at new technologies, deep technologies, integrate it into the university and education system. Now, for Singapore, it's a defensive move. They have to diversify.
Yeah.
The financial markets, when you look at the financial sector, is being totally disrupted. Not only with cryptocurrency and everything else, you got e-commerce, digital payments, you've got all these new formulas coming out. So the traditional banks are being disrupted.
Yeah.
So they've got to diversify. And so they want to diversify into deep tech, and that's a smart move. You get small pockets of Korea doing the same. You've got Japan always been in deep tech, but the other parts of their sectors are not there. So on their academic side, they have a lot of great research, but on the job side, they export. So these are some of the issues that are happening. And then certainly the larger, you got China on one side, 1.5 billion people, you got India on the other side, 1.5 billion people. And you look at the two different approaches. I mean, people are people. All people are smart. All right? All people are diligent. All people are, persuasive. People are people in that sense. But why is China doing what it's doing and India is doing what it's doing? Right? So you've got elements of corruption, you've got elements of the lack of government support for education. China invests heavily into education, heavily into innovation, heavily into new technology. And so you got these different things, and you got to figure out why is that happening? Cultural, traditional, there are reasons for it, but it's simply a different approach. And if China can do it, any country can do it.
Yeah.
But why aren't they? And so this is where it gets into a bit of the power dynamics, from that old school to new school. You saw a little bit during the internet revolution. You're seeing a little bit now with this industrial revolution 4.0. You see it around, especially around manufacturing with automation and some of these things. But I tell you, when the first cluster to really come in is 5G and IoT. That's a foundational technology.
Yeah.
And once you get that in, you can lay automation, robotics, mobility, you can lay a lot of things on top of it, but you need faster connectivity at a better price. You need more sensors, you need more things connected. And once you do that, the data collected from that is really going to start to dictate where the rest of all that technology, where the rest of the investment's going in. But if you look at what is driving all this, business? No. Business caught in the middle. Governments? No. Government's caught in the middle. It's investors or consumers.
Right.
If investors are demanding friendlier investments, business has to change.
Yeah.
If consumers are demanding friendlier products and services,
Yeah.
business have to change. So
Right.
business doesn't have the power it used to have by pushing things onto the marketplace.
Yep. So I'm going to play devil's advocate here, right? So, we're talking about the shift into investments, into ESG, things that are friendlier to the environment. And as a devil's advocate, I might say, oh great, those are noble causes. You want to save the planet and all like that. But don't you want to make money? Why don't you want to focus on what makes you money, man?
Yeah.
Crypto, fintech.
Yeah, crypto.
Why trouble yourself with all these lofty causes? Why save the world when you can make money?
Yeah.
Why should one invest in ESG when they can go and buy a crypto in 10x?
Yeah.
Right? This is probably a huge question when someone looks at ESG investing. They might even see, and I'm playing devil's advocate, they might even see the fact that you are setting SDG goals. Is that a drag on your alpha? Because you have to, it's more like you're pigeonholing yourself into having to not only make money, but you got to also save the planet too.
Yeah.
So what is your response to that?
I mean, this is the common argument, right?
Yeah.
So there's a misconception, a misunderstanding that profit on one side and impact on the other side are not mutually compatible, that it is a zero-sum game. As you gain more impact, you lose profit. As you gain more profit, you lose impact.
Yep.
And that's wrong.
Why?
But that misconception is actually really drawn out because of the early impact investment community.
Right.
Because that's the mentality that they had, that impact first, mission first, all these concepts. And if you take a hit on your profit, well then you find more subservient investors that are not looking for market or market plus returns, right?
Right.
But that whole model has shifted over now. And that's why I was saying with SDGx, we're spinning that around. That we are looking for impact. But impact cannot grow without a strong business model. So if the business model cannot scale, impact cannot scale. So we are business model first. We are looking for strong business models, and we are looking at deep technology. So when you look back at the internet revolution that happened, the dot-com time, there was big money made on market expansion. There was huge money made on market creation, creating brand new markets, creating brand new consumers. And this is the cycle that we're going through now, the next 10 or 15 years. There'll be money on copycats, there'll be money on expansion. That's why from Silicon Valley, honestly, there really hasn't been any brand new innovation out of Silicon Valley in 8, 9, almost 10 years. A lot of copycats, a lot of layovers, but something truly innovative, something truly different, really hasn't come out of Silicon Valley. Where it's coming out of is Asia. And there's reasons, we can talk about the regulatory reasons behind that. But to go back to the original question, you look at Unilever as a corporation, 30% of their product line is considered green. 70% is traditional in their very wide product line. Profitability, the majority of their profits come from the green products. They don't know how that comes in. They don't know if it's consumer sentiment that's driving it or cost savings that's driving it. They're still evaluating why. But Paul Polman, who was the ex-chairman, just retired, of Unilever, made a conscious decision to shift into green, thinking that it was more a sustainability issue, a corporate social responsibility issue. But what they're finding is that's their bulk of profitability.
And you're saying they don't know yet why?
They haven't done the full analysis why.
Okay.
Because there's a couple ways to make money on impact, right? One is if you look at energy efficiency, reducing energy,
That's a given.
you're saving.
Right.
But on a P&L, it's the same thing, right? If you reduce your costs, you make more profit.
Yep.
Or you expand your market and make more profit, and you have same costs, right? So you either want to increase revenue or you want to reduce costs. So energy efficiency on one side reduces costs. But if you are creating a product that is energy efficient, that is attractive to consumer, you can actually increase profit at the same time that you're reducing costs. So recyclable, anything in circular economy, on one side you're reducing costs, but you're increasing profit because you're creating new markets. So the old argument is, if I took an impact investment vehicle right now and brought it to the traditional market, the only investors I could attract are those who are willing to take below market. But if you look at the new consumer models, if you look at the new, especially out here in Asia, where the middle class is the fastest growing middle class in the world is here in Asia. So we've got a growing middle class here. We've got youth bubbles in Middle Asia, where you have a lot of aging bubbles in Europe, North America, Japan, Korea. So we have youth bubbles coming up, which means the middle class is going to grow even further. It's a matter of making brand new products, brand new services, brand new markets, and that's where the big profitability comes in. So yeah, the old adage, it does stick, and there are a lot of impact investors that still work on that model. They expect their investors to get lower returns. And there are enough foundations, family offices, there are enough that are generous enough to expect a lower return, right? They're looking at secondary returns. But if you look at the mass markets, which is, whatever, 170 trillion that runs the global economy, no, they want market returns, and they demand market returns. And you look at the combination of impact, new VC models, and deep technology, it's creatable. And you see this. You see market returns coming back on impact investment, or ESG, higher than market at the moment, higher than the S&P. Yeah.
Can you give us some example of that?
Well,
I invested in Tesla and I made some money last year. But okay, that's only one company in the ESG doing electric vehicles that make money back to my account more than my crypto. But another example.
Just to add,
now we're going to get technical.
Yeah, just to add real quick, and I think this is one takeaway that I got from what you said, is that the new model of ESG investing is you focus on strong business models first, because once they're strong, you're saying the profit and the growth will come from them pioneering new markets, right? And Tesla is a great example of that, because they are pioneering the EV market.
Yes.
So I guess the old model is all about, feel good, kumbaya, let's have this environmentally conscious thing, but the model that you're talking about is strong businesses that are, by saving the world, they are pioneering new markets through their innovation. So yeah, could you give us examples? Like you mentioned that the companies that you've been discovering are in Asia, because you said it might be regulatory, issues in Europe or whatever. Could you give us some like Tesla's a great poster child. Everyone knows of that, but then we need examples of other companies too. So what are some companies that you've been talking about that are in Asia, creating new markets with strong business models?
Well, there's a couple. I mean, I can't talk specifically about the companies themselves, NDAs and all this kind of stuff.
Okay.
But if you look at the trends on where the economy is going, so for example, ocean-based economy. The prediction right now is that ocean-based economy will be larger than land-based economy by 2045.
So this is like the blue revolution?
So if you look at, for example, you look at land-based economy, land prices are going up, land prices becoming scarce. There's a lot of civic activism against deforestation, right? Nature reserves and everything else. So land is a power dynamic.
Yep.
Ocean. Who owns the ocean? I mean, the ocean is the Wild West. I mean, there's a lot of ways. So you look at, for example, vertical aquaculture. And the way that you can look at the difference between ocean and land is, and this is the way that actually Elon Musk looks at space, that you could segment it. So from an ocean, you can take the first 10 meters, you can sell the second 10 meters, you can sell the second 10 meters, the third 10 meters. So there's a lot of ways of looking at ocean because of the space differentiation. It's a 3D world as opposed to a 2D plane on land,
got
right?
it. Yeah.
So underwater factories. I mean, there's a lot of research right now that is looking at underwater automation. So first of all, you're working in a viscosity, you're working in water. It's very expensive to put humans underwater. It's rather cheap to put robots underwater. So you got automation, building things in a low gravity space that has a natural cooling system through viscosity through the water, has a natural cooling system. And so these are some of the areas that are really interesting. So when you look at anywhere underwater manufacturing, you look at underwater aquaculture, the way that they can stack aquaculture or different types of agriculture. Yeah, so you got fishes, you got mussels, you got seaweeds, you got algae, you got all the different types.
So this is an industry right now that you're talking about.
This is some of the industries that we are looking at.
Wow.
Yeah, and it's true. I've seen a company called Salma in Norwegia, I guess, and they have created the first completely automated farm for salmon, and they are producing like 10 million salmon type of thing a month, and this is working so well.
Yeah.
That China, 9 months later, have copied exactly the same thing in the deep water in China. And so aquaculture seems to be a massive industry that's going to grow, as an example of that. And they were sharing that actually what it takes in terms of biomaterial to create one chicken is for 1 kilogram you need 9 kilograms of grass and other products. But for fish, you just need 2. So 1 kilo for 2. And for shrimp and other of these type of crustacea, so pardon the French, is just 1-to-1.
Yeah.
So this is the solution for the global food problem, and we're going to have 8 billion people to feed, and this is much cheaper to do it in the ocean.
But not only that, I mean, you look at the ocean, there's so much undiscovered different types of materials and bacteria and enzymes and everything else in the ocean. I mean, this is also a health issue. There are new medicines being discovered.
Right.
And if you look at, again, this concept of low gravity, I mean, I know the pharmaceutical companies are actually sending up a lot of equipment to the space station.
It's more expensive.
Well, to the space station, yeah, but they can. But in zero gravity, you can create new types of molecules. So you look at oncology, anti-cancer. You look at these types of things. In zero gravity, material does different things.
Wow.
So, and this is where the magic happens. So when I talk about the internet revolution is going to be nothing compared to the future. That was one technology that went crazy.
Yeah.
Now you take the combination of material science and underwater manufacturing. So you got all
IoT,
now nanomaterials and everything else, robotics,
right?
Robotics underwater,
right? and then you got energy, so you got batteries underwater. So you get a lot of these things. It's fully automated. They don't need air conditioning. They don't need toilets. They don't need lunch breaks. They can work 24 hours. They don't even need
Okay,
lights.
I'm sold. Which stocks can we invest in now that we do better in crypto for this ocean?
SDGx.
Okay, that's what we're gonna invest in.
Join the fund.
Okay.
So that's one industry that's really eye-opening.
And that's just one of the examples of different.
Right. So what are some other industries that are gonna break out that we just the mainstream media or like the rest of us have no idea about?
Well, I mean, you look at some of the better investments, even over the last 20 years. Some of the better investments are in material science. It is probably it is the Wizard of Oz of investments. It's what is behind the curtain. Nobody's talking about material science, but material science is going through a revolution. Not only in the way the materials are put together, but the combination, the chemical combinations that are put together. So you can talk about nano, you can talk about graphite, graphene, and all the different variations of that. But there's new materials being created all the time. A combination of chemical and physical. These are happening all the time. So when you look at green infrastructure, the big demand on green infrastructure, that's going to come from new materials. You look at EVs, batteries, new types of batteries. That's going to come. You look for anything about so biohacking, biowind plants, any of these things, you're going to put chips in these types of things. That's going to come from new materials. So new materials is really a very good place to start. And there are, a friend in Vancouver that they invest primarily in new materials.
Ventures.
Right.
So you tell me that
and they do very good.
If I have just $10 to invest in stocks right now, instead of investing in crypto, I could invest in a new material company and make more return next 2-3 years.
I mean, as an investor, there's two things you do as an investor. You look at how you manage risk and you look at talent.
Yeah.
That's the two things, right? In crypto, how are you going to manage that risk is a big question, and what talent is actually driving that industry? That's the other question. So this is what you have to look at, and if you can live with that type of risk, then crypto's not bad. But you got to understand, crypto's a bit of a pump and dump.
Yeah, and unless
there's no end story,
down,
right?
Yeah.
What is the exit on crypto?
Yeah.
So on the company, the exit is it gets listed. The exit, there's a lot of exit opportunities on your portfolio theory, but on crypto, the idea is to hold early and tell everyone to buy, and that's exactly what's happened. It's pump and dump. And I'm not saying the crypto is a bad thing. I'm not saying Bitcoin's a bad thing. Without crypto and without the conceptualization of Bitcoin, we wouldn't have e-commerce. We wouldn't have digitalization.
No, decentralized finance.
We wouldn't have a lot of things. So
Yeah.
I mean, there's nothing to that. This is not bad nothing crypto at all. I mean, I've been in and out myself. So there's nothing bad about crypto in that sense. But what is the exit?
Right.
The exit, when they create this 22 million Bitcoin, what then? What happens? I mean,
it's not going to skyrocket anymore.
and so
it's going to stabilize.
right. So, and this is part of the investment, and this is why some of the larger investors are having a big issue in that sense. It's great for Musk to go in with $1.5 billion and tell everyone else to go in. And I think he made, $247 million on his first day?
Wow.
Something like that. Because he went in, the noise went out, and things bumped. But one has to watch it. So managing risk and searching for talent. The hunt for talent is on. And this hybrid talent that really understands what's going on in the future world on one side, doesn't have sort of an inset agenda, so fairly neutral, strong understanding of power dynamics, but that's what is really driving a lot of the better investments, is understanding the power dynamics on one side, and then managing that risk. Understanding when to get in, understanding when to get out, understanding how to manage that when you own that asset in your portfolio. What do you do with it and what do you hook it up with? And this goes down to portfolio theory, and this is a big part around impact VCs. Going back again to the earlier question, portfolio theory is changing drastically, right? So you had the Rocket Brothers, their model. You got 500 startup and their type of model, which a lot of people are copying. You got the institutional model, go in heavy, so SoftBank and these types, go in heavy, try to go for the exit, for the IPO. But I think this is now starting to change because we're moving back to pre-internet environment, where who has the power going forward, right? So initially, you go back to the '60s, and let's go on a little travelogue here. So you go back to the '60s and '70s. You go back to Silicon Valley. You got Park Research. You got Xerox. You got NASA. No profit motivation, creating brand new stuff. just a lot of money to create brand new stuff, but they had no push to commercialize. And they created the internet. They created a lot of things. Practically everything in your iPhone.
Yeah, iPhone
was created.
microwaves.
Right, was all created then. And then came in this class of people that said, wait a minute, we can build a business model around that, right? And that's what sort of created the startups. Then the investors said, well, how do we handle this risk? You know, out of 10, 9 are going to fail, 1's going to go big. How do we manage that? So the VC model was created. So you have this stacking of all these different societies starting to come together, and that's what created the internet revolution. So that's what all created. Now we're moving right back to the beginning. Who owns the power now? Where's the power dynamic? Research institutions, because they know what's coming down the pipeline. They have the new technology.
They have the new technology.
Right?
That
But-
NASA were having 40 years
Exactly. I mean, and they have, but you look at the difference in the environment. The 60s and 70s, John F. Kennedy, we just put a man on the moon.
Yeah.
The big problem of the world was the Cold War with Russia, which really wasn't a war, it was just sort of an argument going on. Now look where we are. Major political disruptions,
Yeah.
a real push towards nationalism.
Yeah.
You've got a financial system that's on the brink of breaking every 7 to 8 years.
Yeah.
You've got major disruptors coming in like crypto, like Bitcoin on one side, on the financial markets. You've got consumer behavioral change
Yeah.
happening drastically. You've got the big push on impact, green, environment, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
It's not Greenpeace back in the day, right? This is really a movement.
Yeah. Yeah.
And business.
Greta Thunberg and all these
Right.
things.
And then you don't have one technology coming at you. You got about 6 clusters of technology coming
Yeah.
at you.
So it's not just the internet. This is 6 things in one time that we're gonna have to
And-
adapt to,
And that's where the magic is.
and that's
right?
where the investment return's gonna be.
Right.
To
So
your
that
perspective.
So that's where everything sort of has to change. Now the focus on impact is we do need a better world. I think everyone can agree to that. Even if you don't want to agree to it, I think everyone can agree to it. That you can make money now. The markets are starting to prove that you can make money on impact. But when we look at getting ahead of the curve, getting into the deep technology before it becomes totally commercialized, looking at combinations of technology. So you look at blockchain, you look at AI and blockchain, that's really interesting. AI, blockchain, and automation, wow.
Yeah.
Now we're going somewhere, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So it's the convergence of these new technologies. It's not the internet that just got better and better and better.
Yeah.
These are different worlds colliding, and we don't know what they're going to create. So to get ahead of that, so again, research now has got the power. A class of people are going to come in and say, wait a minute, I can create some brand new businesses with that. The VC model, the investors are going to come in and say, wait a minute, we can create a way to manage that type of risk and go forward. So we're going to start this whole thing all over again, but it's going to be totally different.
So you keep mentioning these 6 pillars, these 6 waves, these 6 industries. What are these 6? Can you just list them for us?
Yeah.
I mean, it's foundational. You've
So,
got...
new materials.
Yeah, but
ocean.
if we start as foundational, the first big wave is going to be IoT and 5G.
IoT, 5G, okay.
Right, the combination of connectivity, cheap broadband connectivity, with everything being connected, IoT, right? So the combination of these two. Now, what that's going to create is a whole bunch of data, right? So AI and all the variants, so AI, ML, NLP, all the variants of AI comes next because they need a way to analyze all this data.
Right.
So then AI comes in. And then you start to work in different variants, right? So you got genomics and biotech.
Right.
So that's data and technology, but at a DNA scale.
Right.
Then you've got...
That's using AI, analyzing protein sequencing, going through billions and billions of DNA combinations to find anomalies ahead of time. That's basically genomics there, curing disease.
And there's a great example of that right now called the Optimus Fund, put out by UBS in Switzerland.
Right.
That is using Wall Street algorithms, financial engineering algorithms, to discover new pathways of cancer drugs.
Wow.
And it's called the Optimus Fund. You can go and invest.
That's great.
Professor Ott at MIT.
Yeah.
Yeah, and see, and this is where these combinations start to come.
So you got the foundation of connectivity
You
in
got IoT
5G.
and 5G, you got
AI. Then you got genomics. That's
You
one.
got genome, then you got another spear up that. It's going to be automation and robotics.
Sure. Yeah.
Then you got material science,
Yeah.
and then you got neurocog.
Neurocognitives.
Neuroscience, cognitive computing, and then on top of that there'll be something called quantum. It probably will change, but something called quantum computing in the front end, which is going to unleash incredible computational power.
So these are the breakthroughs that you see coming in the next decade to look out for, right?
So for anyone with $10, if you want to make money on stock market, just invest in these, right?
Yeah, I was just going to get to that. Like, so we've identified these key breakthroughs, these pillar industries. How does one express their viewpoint? Now, you have this viewpoint that these are the industries that are in. How does one put money to work?
I mean, there's a couple ways. I mean, I think there's going to be a pushback to seed and early stage investing. And I think that money is going to go to scientists. It's going to go to primary research. So you go back to the 60s and where that money was going in. Where was jobs? Where were these people? Scott over at Sun, all these people, where were they putting their money into? Well, they're buying technology from the research institutes and commercializing it. So they're buying their patents. And I think that's going to be one of the big moves going forward, is really to work and understand, get back to school. That's one thing I'll tell everyone, one leg in school, get back to research. But I think this is where you're going to find a lot of it. I mean, I don't go to Google anymore. I go to Google Scholar if I'm searching for anything nowadays. I use a lot of the academic journals. I mean, I read a lot of journals and really try to understand some of the primary research and what can be drawn out of that. When I'm talking with startups, it's a lot of times when I'm talking about a startup that has a product and service on the market or about to go on the market now, I'm thinking, I know a technology that's going to come out in 2 or 3 years that's going to make this thing fly. And that's where you have to get a bit of ahead of the curve. And that's exactly what Jobs and Gates and all these people, I mean, they were betting against society. They were saying that, wait a minute, there is no market there. There's this little piece of technology. I can do it. IBM says you can't put a computer in every house. Wait, I got a different idea. I think you can do that. And so the idea of this, you talk about smartphones, you talk about the new development of smartphones. Smartphones eventually will be a bioimplant. They'll be inside you. And so there's a lot of this. Biohacking is going to be really big when you start to look at that. So again, it really comes down to, if you have $10 now, my best friends would be researchers.
Researchers.
Yeah. I mean, if it's on the market now, chances are it's going to be disrupted because it doesn't have a lot of that deep technology.
What do you mean when you say researchers? Because they're not IPOing, right? They're just a bunch of people at a research institution. So how does one get into that?
There's a concept called science to business.
Okay.
And you see there's organizations. There's one here in Thailand, A-Stars in Singapore. A lot of universities like MIT, Carnegie Mellon, Stanford, they have spin-outs, so they have their own accelerators and incubators inside. A lot of PhD students, get to know a lot of PhD students. I mean, this is where the tech scouting now has shifted. A lot of tech scouting for deep tech was going to Shenzhen back in the day, right? And they'd go to their big markets, their 3D markets, their, what they call them, makers fairs? And these kind of stuff, right? So you got Hacks in Shenzhen, the big hardware accelerator, great place. You've got these types of things. But now it's moving backwards. If you want to get ahead of the curve, you got to go where the beginning of that wave is. And the beginning of that wave is back into science, right? So whatever area you're interested in, it could be agriculture, it could be buildings, it could be urban, it could be climate, it could be whatever. Get back into the primary research and understand what is being developed. And because whatever becomes public is extremely old. I mean, you got Boston Dynamics, right? Spot, the little robots that made the big whirl last year on YouTube. Wow, these robots are really cool. Those videos were 6 years old.
Oh, wow.
What's happening now, when you got these spots about this size and they're swarming.
Wow.
So you got these swarm robots that can actually, like ants, stack on each other and build their own things. I mean, this is where a lot of this, but it doesn't get out to the public space. So as an investor, you've got to get out of the public space into the private space and start talking with researchers.
Right. Wow, super interesting. And I can really see now where this ESG sector is really leading the way into the deep tech. Right? It's not just impact, it's deep tech-led impact.
Yeah.
Using the best of humanity's technology and knowledge to solve problems that will be making money.
Yeah.
So wow, that's
we're not in the business of going in today's world and trying to change things.
Yeah.
We're in the business of looking at tomorrow's world and creating brand new things.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just our philosophy and the way we run the portfolio is, it's too difficult to change. There's too many power dynamics. There's too much entrenchment in today's world So we just want to create that new world. And the way best way to create that new world is create new products and services that are green and make a lot of money, and people will buy into it. And that's exactly, in a small scale, what happened with the internet, and that's exactly the direction we want to go.
So you see a lot of innovations like that happening in Asia, and you mentioned regulation as a big hurdle in the West. Do you see regulation as a threat eventually in Asia?
Potentially. Okay. The thing is, what you'll find is in North America is overregulated. You see this in California specifically, but North America is just simply overregulated. Europe is extremely overregulated, and it's defensive policy, right? So basically, a lot of the regulation and policy is what you cannot do. Yeah, it's what you can't do. But when you look at Asia, because of ASEAN as a collective regional community, that they don't have a common platform, they don't have a common framework. So all the nations regulate themselves individually, and they're relatively under-regulated. You see this in different sectors, in different markets, in different countries, all over the place, relatively under-regulated. And because of that, a lot of the new technology, which will be thwarted in Europe and North America because they're afraid of it, will actually be developed here and on the ground first here. So they may be taking in technology transfer from Europe, MIT, Beijing, or Tsinghua, a lot of the different universities, but it's going to get on the ground, I believe, in Asia first, and that's where the first applications are going to be. Go back to Silicon Valley way back when. It was the under-regulation, the hippie movement, the freedom that California had at that time that created the atmosphere of creativity and innovation and mixing and matching. Everyone get together, kumbaya, let's create something new.
Burning Man.
Yeah. But now it's just becoming over-regulated, and that is what I think now. You get a certain class of Asian youth that travel around, that communicate on Facebook and all the different social platforms, that are sharing ideas, are willing to work together. They don't have an agenda. They're just trying to do things differently. They don't want to work for corporate whatever. They don't want to do this. They want to do something new. Liquidity is not the problem. There's a lot of liquidity around. So there's a lot of money floating around. It's the talent and the ideas that really have to come in. And a good example of this is the genomics. If you look at the twins, the Chinese doctor that created the twins that modified the DNA, supposedly, and this is true, that they had a much reduced exposure to HIV. That's what he did. That's what he was changing. But honestly, what he also changed, and this is in the you can read this in the papers, he actually changed the DNA structure that gives them a larger cerebral cortex, which actually means, and they're twins, two girls, and which means that they will actually grow up and potentially be a lot smarter than you and I, because they're going to have a larger cortex. And this was done, a little slap on the wrist. He's still experimenting. So a lot of these things are going to happen. Material science, you get a lot of green infrastructure out here. Nanotechnology, you get a lot of that out here. Drones, the amount of drones that you can actually use out here, even though it's slightly restricted, go to Europe.
Yeah, you can't.
Go to North America.
Yeah.
I mean,
it's so inspiring.
You need licenses, you need everything.
It's so inspiring for a tech entrepreneur like me, and there's so many of these wannabe entrepreneurs. You know, they see this video on YouTube, hey, you want to become an e-commerce entrepreneur, and they're all like taking the class to become an e-commerce entrepreneur and do drop shipping. But this makes me realize how much narrow we're just looking at the internet. And this is done 20 years ago. Making money on the internet was done 20 years ago. And I think my generation of entrepreneurs started in 2015 and make money from it is one of the last one, right? Now it's really in e-commerce, the era of consolidation, right? You have Amazon, Lazada, Shopee, and that's it.
It's over.
It's over, guys. It's game over. Just stop beating the horse. He's dead, right? But notice these amazing 6 new pillars you're talking about, and no one else is thinking about it. So I'm super interested. I want to start everything now. I want to start an ocean aquaculture company. I want to start a new material company.
That is also gene editing and.
Oh my god, what am I gonna start with? But maybe you guys can. You guys who are watching, right? And so if you want to start a company and be a next billionaire, or just a millionaire, or just make money from your family,
call him or call Atlas Society. This is what we're trying to do here.
This is the thing, and how motivating it is, how positive it is to see that these amazing things just lying down in front of us.
Yeah.
And that's for everyone, not just entrepreneurs. Maybe it's for artists.
Yeah.
to use those new
Sure.
materials and use the new technology and make different things that never have been
Yeah.
done before in the artist industry.
There's the artist is a really interesting community, and I think that should be part of the society, because there's a group actually called Artists for AI, and if you look at any of the major movements, it came from artists. It came from musicians. It came from the art world, the pop.
Yeah.
Really, these transitional.
They're the ones
shifts.
that romanticize the movements.
Right.
really.
They know how to manage their risk.
Yeah.
They know how to manage the power dynamics, and they know how to get in to create a change.
Right.
So Bob Dylan and that whole thing, you got all these different things that are happening, rock and roll, you name it. And these are really driving movements. And I think artists are really going to start to understand where a lot of this the potential of a lot of this technology is, because they're not in a box.
Yeah, they're outside of the box.
And they're outside of the boxes all over the box.
Yeah.
Right? They're focused, but they're outside and they have different perspectives. So I think there's a really interesting area to have a discussion with artists and some of this new technology.
Yeah. So just to wrap this up, you talked about the enthusiasm to get into these 6 spaces and how it is ripe for disruption. You talk about in Asia, there's plenty of liquidity, plenty of talent. In your view, what advice would you give? What do you think needs to happen to ensure the success of these industries in the next decade? That all these ideas come to fruition. What do you think are the most important things that need to be done?
Well, I think if you were to talk to investors, it is sort of reimagining what risk is, redefining risk outside of the pure financial models, right? So you've got financial engineering models, all the investors do, but outside of that, when you look at societal changes and the major transitions of society, you've got to rethink risk. Risk is not only dollars and cents anymore. It's not only P&L, right? So you've got to think about these other risks, because your business is going to get hurt. Portfolio theory, the same thing. You've got to rethink how you structure a portfolio together, and not just look at individual investments, look at the portfolio investments, but also how that works. From an entrepreneur side, I think there's, there's just so many huge opportunities. I mean, take the blockers off. Don't try to copycat and don't try to think. Think about brand new markets. Close your eyes and think of Blade Runner. Think of The Matrix. Think of these things and put yourself in that situation, and then put 1,000 consumers in that situation. And what are they looking for? What are they looking for? Given no rules, what are they looking for?
Right.
And this is a lot of, you go back to design theory, for example. Design theory, the real remnants of design theory really started around the internet, before the internet came out. And you look at those that created the internet and those that created all the layers on top of the internet. There was no boundaries. So if you're stuck in a box, the best way is to get out of that box. And I would think, and that goes into a lot of you. I mean, the first person to talk about innovation is you. You have to innovate yourself. You have to change your own behavior. You have to change your own thinking. And that's where some of these ideas are actually going to come out. And then you capitalize on them, and you look for hybrid models. You look for a model that lives today and a model that's going to live tomorrow. So scalability is not taking today's business model and scaling it anymore, right? So you got 3-dimensional scale. You got different types of scale. You got new market creation. So there's a lot of different thinking that comes in. People, I think, got lazy between 2000 and 2020. The commercialization of all that old technology.
The iPhone is still the same for the past 10 years.
Yeah.
I mean, this is the thing. Rethink the whole thing. Rethink how to communicate. And you do see splinters of this. And I would also, from all sectors, from government all the way down, I would start to really look at research. And really start to understand some of the very incredibly interesting research that's coming out of universities, that's coming out of research institutions, and even coming out of odd areas like the United Nations, discovering agriculture, and look at this type of stuff, because we are moving into a brand new world.
And that's really what we want to push forward with Atlas Society. We just started this podcast and YouTube channel that you guys can go and follow with Jed, and we're going to try to seek those researchers, those entrepreneurs, those artists, and even like corporate management and politicians who are
bring them
Yeah, it's-
together
Yeah.
and show,
Give them a voice.
giving them a voice, giving the spotlight onto them.
Yeah, and as you can see, this is crazy. We're in Bangkok and we
Yeah.
have working quantum books in front of us.
Yeah,
Like, who the hell had thought we could have such an incredible mind in Bangkok? And you know what? I'm 100%, okay, 98% sure that in Kinshasa, in Lagos, in Manila, you also have these guys. And today,
there's talented people everywhere,
today they're
passionate
giving the
people
voice.
everywhere.
Today we're always listening to New York. We're
Yeah.
always listening to Paris. We're always listening to London. But actually, the bright people with the opportunities in mind, they don't stay in those hubs. They are in developing countries.
They're in the emerging markets.
They are in the emerging markets.
They're pioneering. They're at the forefront.
Exactly. So, what if you, who's watching, can start an Atlas Society chapter and identify who is the David Galipeau in your city and bring it up? How amazing would that be, right? And how much you can give back to your society locally to inspire local entrepreneurs, artists, and corporate managers
Yeah.
with these values, right? So that's really the power we want to instigate with this new society. If you're interested to start a chapter, please contact us.
Yeah.
And yeah, thank you so much, David,
Yeah.
to be here.
Oh,
David,
not a
seriously, we can talk all night, but I need to give way to the next panel that's coming up. Finish off with how can people learn more about you and SDGx? Where can they go?
I mean, SDGx.io. That's you can go to that's the corporate website. You go to Galipeau.com. That's my website. Hard to understand my website, but my website we do actually list. We list a lot of the brand new technologies and some of the areas that we're looking at from a research perspective on my website. But I think is you want to learn more about me, learn more about hybrids, learn more about those people that just don't fit in one box.
And how can you become a hybrid, maybe? As
Yeah, I mean, in that sense.
And how hybrids can get together and do something, right?
Oh, I think this is, I mean, you look at things like pattern recognition, you look at, these are the skills of the future when you start to understand that. And you don't have to understand, I mean, I grew up in a farm village in Canada. I just got lucky, and I just happened to be at the right time at the right spot and moved around and soaked it all in. But those that have a bit of a Peter Pan syndrome, those that are infinitely curious, those that are really working outside, you know, those that like to bend the rules a little bit, I think those are the ones that are really interesting. And for the longest time, if you weren't in that MBA profile, right? If you weren't in that corporate profile, wearing the suit and tie, people didn't want to talk to you. But I think now, and this is where the artists sort of come into it, the artisans that are really coming into these types of things. And you don't have to understand the deep technology. You really have to understand what that technology can do. So you
be able
don't.
to think creatively about.
Yeah, you don't have
Right.
you don't have to write an algorithm. You have to understand what algorithms can do. What is the power
to
of
create
an algorithm?
value to your users.
What is the power of automation? And
Or what
that-
problems you can solve, right?
Yeah.
You can address.
Yeah. I think if you take that sort of approach, a little more open approach, a little more curious approach, I think you'll see opportunity.
Wow. David, thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks for the conversation.
Yeah, no
Thanks
problem.
For bringing me on.
Definitely got to have you back on sometime in the
Yeah,
future.
interesting. And join
Atlas Society.
Atlas Society,
Yeah.
a society of hybrids.
That's amazing. All right. Thanks a lot, David.
Thanks.